And the other thing, just as an aside, is that Plato particularly, and the Neoplatonists, as well as giving you this kind of beautiful, very simple cosmology, this concept of the soul's immortality and the soul's journey through this life, also gives you practical ways of approaching it. You know, the kind of philosophy as a way of being in the world, not just as a kind of intellectual exercise. Virtue ethics, for example. How do we think? How on earth do we make the judgments that we make? And that is also important today in a world that just like nobody learns that stuff anymore. Nobody learns how to think. Nobody is taught in school literally how to think. Why do I think what I think? Where do my judgments come from? You know, what are my values? Are they good values? Are they just standing back and just like looking at yourself and thinking, what on earth am I doing in this life? That's also a really good practical consequence of Platonism in particular.
I mean, yeah, what you just described there, I mean, I was thinking, God, that's often what I do in my therapy practice, is helping people think better about their lives.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kind of having this, what I imagine to be a kind of Socratic dialogue of just like, just questioning, just, you know, finding those ossified stories that are causing you stress and distress and, you know, disruption in your relatedness and all of that. And just like questioning, get onto something that actually seems more true and connected to reality. And that is what I think of as philosophy, is the practice of philosophy.
It is absolutely the practice of it. Yeah, it always was a way of life, and then we put it in universities and made it a kind of, you know, an intellectual exercise to show how clever we were. But that's not what it was ever supposed to be. It was supposed to be about the acquisition of wisdom, you know, the illumination of wisdom by looking at yourself and challenging yourself and just saying, okay, what on earth am I thinking? Quite literally. And I genuinely do think we've lost that knack. And I like the idea that in a world that is clearly going to hell in a handbasket, where not very many people are thinking, particularly our leaders, that we can combine that sense of an obligation to actually just step back and say, okay, what are we doing? Alongside that kind of spiritual input, which tells us that it has a purpose and that we have an obligation, we have a responsibility. Do you know, one of the things that I've always said whenever I've taught this concept of the soul's journey from Plato, and particularly in the context of James Hillman's book, The Soul's Code, where he kind of developed that in a very beautiful way for quite a long time. And I always say when I'm teaching that it's really weird, and I might be really weird, but ever since I was a small child, I had this concept. I just had this kind of innate idea that this was not a free ride. You know, I wasn't here to grow rich and retire early and sail on a yacht for 20 years, that there was something I had to not necessarily do, but be, that I had a responsibility. I had a duty. And we've also lost a lot of that, I think, in the world today, the sense that we are obliged to show up and to believe that what we do and what we think and who we are actually matters to that unfolding of the universe. And again, all this old philosophy gives us that. It matters. We came here for a reason.
Yeah. I was speaking to someone a couple of weeks ago. They had me on their podcast, and I don't know, I guess I haven't talked about this too much or too publicly or anything, but it came up in our conversation. I was telling her that, because she was asking about the Soul's Code, because I've developed a coaching program for people on personal myth work, and it's very much inspired by Soul's Code and the myth of Ur. But I was telling her that ever since I was a little kid, feeling quite out of place in my family of origin, and even in the kind of the working class community that we were within, feeling like this strange duck, kind of out of, you know, where did I come from? Why am I here? But I had this very strong innate sense that, you know, my soul chose to be born into this family for a reason, to learn certain lessons. And I was telling her, like, we didn't have books of Platonism around the home. My mom had romance novels and Stephen King books. That was the extent of it. So I don't know where it came from. It just came in like a voice telling me, this is what you're here for. And that helped me with all of the challenges and struggles that I was going to. I was like, well, I don't know. I guess I chose this life for a reason. And it's my job to kind of see it through and try to learn the lessons as they're presented to me. And then, I come across the Soul's Code, 25 years later or whatever, and I read this Myth of and it just like, it hit me like, yes, this is as good a story as any for why I'm here and what I'm meant to be here for.
Me too. Absolutely. The first time I read that, just like everything slotted into place.
Yeah.
Just like that's kind of, again, but it's a very simple thing. Yeah. You don't need a whole Bible or Quran or whatever. You don't need a doctrine and a set of rules around it. You just need you just need someone to say that can be a thing.
Yes.
And also to then teach you how to orient yourself towards it. And what I am trying to bring to the Nostos program is that Platonism and Neoplatonism have a tendency to be very contemplative practices, which are very beautiful. You need to sit and you need to contemplate kind of the nature of reality and to let it kind of come into you. You really genuinely do. Mm-hmm. But humans today, particularly, I think, sometimes need a bit more help to actually find our way into that imaginal world, which is the world of, that Henri Corbin so beautifully elucidated, which is the world. It's kind of the dancing ground of the world soul, the anima mundi of the ancient tradition. We need to find our ways in, and we don't always do it well. I certainly don't do it well by contemplation. It's not that I'm not a contemplative person, but
contemplation sounds so dry and dull.
Well, no, it's not. I think it can be incredibly beautiful, but I'm not. It's not my superpower. Whereas if I can go into an active imagination process in the Jungian sense, or I can more actively take myself into a process of reverie or even dream work, although I'm not greatest at. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that depth psychology, particularly in the post-Jungian tradition, as well as active imagination, actively gives us a way into the imaginal world. And so it seems natural to me to bring the two together, that if these ancient philosophical traditions are telling us, as one of the more interesting Neoplatonists, Iamblichus, said, we need a bit of help to kind of find our way back to the one, to kind of understand who we are and the nature of our soul's journey. And we need to find our way back into the imaginal world, back into what he called, of course, the world of the world soul. And these practices help us do it. So that's what I'm trying to do at Nostos. I'm trying to bring in all of the myth, all of the archetypal work, all of the dream work, particularly all of the active imagination, even that beautiful and fascinating and newly developing field of archetypal cosmology and astrology, which takes us right back to Pythagoras. And as you alluded to earlier on, that idea that actually the stars and the constellations are all part of this grand cosmic dance of which we're a part. How do we try to discern some of those influences? It all feeds in perfectly. Neoplatonism was kind of almost a kind of neo-depth psychology, compared to Platonism. It was very much more spiritual, but it was also very much more psychological. It was very much about the soul and how we grow the soul.